Hello, hello. This is the My Artifact episode number 3723. Today's date is all right. Okay. So what exactly is this thing? Okay. Should we start? Well, I am kind of getting some sort of notification regarding about the Flipkart, and by the way, today my Amazon product should supposed to be arrive. Wait, is it shipped? Wait, where it is? Is it my order? Okay, it will gonna arrive in today. All right, that is good. All right, yeah. So should we start? All right, yeah. So this is my artifact episode number 3723. Probably, I'm not really sure. Today's date is November 25, 2025. It's been almost like morning at 7:45 a.m. All right, let's just jump into the question. Let's go. All right, the question is, what if invention belong to the community? Oh, that is a really good question. By the way, I asked this question yesterday, but I was kind of like a bit really lazy to kind of like give the answer. So that's why I'm kind of asking this question today. Alright, yeah. First of all, what exactly is this question and why am I asking this question to myself? This is what if question. Why am I asking this question to myself? What if question is actually kind of like a somewhat something really interested way to do the answer. It kind of like force you to think about that reality. And when I try to think about that reality, I'm kind of like utilizing my information, knowledge, and experience to kind of like create this reality. And somehow it kind of like felt really good. Somehow it's felt really good means what? Like a felt really good means like I'm kind of like a only. It's not a kind of like a only typical question that you have a stagnant answer. 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. Even if you are kind of like a desert or kind of like near the black hole, this equation always get true. 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. But if I'm gonna say why 4 plus 2 is equal to not 5, like basically when I ask this question, then probably you just have to kind of like a question regarding what is actually 4, what is actually 2, what is actually plus, what is actually equal to, what is actually 5. Then when you try to ask this question, then it kind of like somebody you are kind of like explaining multiple things regarding about what is actually those number means and stuff like that. And it kind of like something kind of like somebody uh, when person is kind of like giving this explanation, that particular person kind of like getting a lot of knowledge and things and that. Okay, so that's why what if question is kind of like a only very interested way to give the answer. Okay, information, sorry, disclaimer, the information that I'm trying to tell you is not exactly right or is not exactly wrong either. It's raw, it's unfiltered, it's my opinion. Okay, yeah. So do not believe in any kind of like information that I'm saying, or do not seek for any kind of like information that I'm saying. Okay, yeah. It's my opinion, and opinion are subjective. All right. Now let's proceed. Now regarding about the question says, what if the invention belongs to the community? What exactly it means? It means that what if the invention that we have today, or whoever the person who are kind of like doing the invention, are kind of like a simply are to the community. Like to the community means what? Like what exactly is this thing? Why is this thing? Okay, yeah. Okay. Let's just take an example. Okay, yeah. Now I am a kind of like a somebody owner of car company. Let's just say Lamborghini. Okay, yeah. And I have kind of like a very kick-ass design of this car. Okay, yeah. And I think that this design is really good, really great. So I kind of like put a lot of effort to kind of like make this design as a car. I like it. Effort means what? Like effort means kind of like I do the research, I do the kind of like some aerodynamic test. I kind of like did all those kind of like a possible thing that design kind of like not only look good, but as well as kind of like somebody at aerodynamic point of perspective, it kind of like pass all the test. As a safety point of perspective, it's pass all the test. And regarding about the material and things and it cost, it this design is kind of like somebody almost not 100% but almost 90% is kind of like a really perfect. Okay, yeah. And I kind of like make this design, okay, yeah, and I make this car. So basically is this thing na ki I should supposed to be get the credibility na. I should supposed to be get the credibility means what? Credibility regarding about the value, the patent, everything. And this is what kind of like a somebody that actually exists. Like basically if you design a car, then probably is this thing that ki you have a patent regarding about that car, because you actually made this car, you actually made this kind of like a something design and things and that. So it belongs to you. It belongs to you. No one will gonna kind of like a some random person kind of like a came and kind of like a make the kind of like a steal your design and kind of like a make the car exactly like you. No, it's not gonna possible. Okay, yeah. If someone does this thing, then you have authority to kind of like a somebody have a copyright infringement to that particular person, or kind of like a somebody get legal case, so that that particular person will not kind of like able to do this thing. Okay, yeah. We have kind of we call them as a kind of like a patent or things or that and that, which kind of copyright or kind of like a patent, this kind of like actually prevent the kind of like a originality to the person who actually create that particular thing. Okay, yeah. But why is that? Why other piece, why other person are kind of like actually wanted to upgrade their product or wanted to upgrade their original product? Why they can't do this thing? What exactly is this thing? What exactly it means? Okay, because it's a kind of completely wrong na. Like basically that individual person is not actually hurting to you actually make the original concept, yeah, that is true, but he was kind of like upgrading your kind of like some concept to even much more better way. So what's exactly wrong thing? Like basically this particular person is kind of like upgrading your design, right, in somewhat something even more better way. So why not it do that thing? Why is that thing? Okay, I'm gonna explain everything step by step, but let's just try to tell you regarding about why is this thing happen. Okay, like basically is this thing in real world, why we are kind of like only protecting the originality concept to the people who are kind of like create that thing. Okay, take an example. Who actually invented the light bulb? Thomas Edison, right? Yeah. Like basically, if I'm gonna ask the question to the every person on the planet or internet, every person or internet or any AI would kind of like only give the same answer. Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. Okay, yeah. Now, basically, is this thing why we remember as a Thomas Edison invented the light bulb? Is because of that ki Thomas Edison kind of like a did lot of patent regarding about his inventions and things and that and that. And that is somewhat something really essential. Okay, and let me tell you one thing why, how. Okay, yeah. Now imagine is this thing that ki if Thomas Edison was this patent and this is not even a concept. Like basically imagine is this thing that ki we are in this world where patent and this thing is not even exist. So there is a Thomas Edison guy who actually invented the light bulb. Okay, yeah. Now invented the light bulb, but what is actually happened that other people are copy their product. Other people copy their kind of like a some invention and things like that, and they are kind of like a somebody promoting that ki they actually invented that thing. But basically is this thing because of Thomas Edison kind of like an invention is kind of like a somebody spread through all over the world, then every person on the planet or every person, not like every person who could afford kind of like a somebody create the thousands of version of the bulb, thousands of version of the world. So basically is this thing their upgradation of the bulb is kind of like a happened so rapidly. So might be like a basically is this thing the we are kind of like a utilizing LED almost like a 200 year after the LED bulb, we kind of like utilizing LED kind of like 100 year even before. Okay, yeah. Like basically the so many upgradation will gonna happen to the bulb and things and that, which is kind of like a really good, really great. Like basically innovations and upgradation happened really good. Okay, yeah. If you still not really understand, let's just take an example. Okay, yeah. Have you listened music? Right? Yeah. The original music is kind of like a somewhat something kind of like original music. But what if kind of like something I remix? I kind of like a put the kind of like a something change the beats and things and kind of like a put it into the remix and things like that. If I kind of like a do this thing, then probably that particular song kind of like a look very differently. Look kind of like a something that key interesting. Okay, yeah. Now why is this thing? Why is that? Because the original concept is a kind of like original concept. Okay, yeah. But when you try to kind of like assembly blend that original concept into the kind of like assembly some sort of remix and things like that, it kind of like a something pleasant to hear. It's not kind of like a better than original version, but it kind of like a somewhat something little bit feel good, that ki ha, this is kind of like something really new. Okay, yeah, like basically the old song kind of like a converted into a remix, and kind of like it felt like a really modern and things and that. Okay, yeah. So this is what kind of like upgradation look like. Upgradation is a kind of like a something is this thing that it kind of like a felt really good. It kind of like a felt that original concept is hard to consume, but when you try to blend it kind of like a something remix and things and that, it kind of like a felt really good. It kind of like a something easy to consume and things like that. Okay, yeah. So basically same thing happened with the other innovation too, like a, let's just say, electric bulb. Okay, or bulb. Oh, electric bulb is a kind of like a some invention by the Thomas Edison, which kind of like a have thousands of variation. And when they have thousands of variation, in the thousands of variation, each variation is kind of like a bit really differently. Let's just say Thomas Edison is kind of like a glowing only yellow color, but there might be kind of like a some sort of kind of like a bulb will kind of like a establish um kind of like a simply like a kind of like a blue or red or things like that. Okay, yeah. Or might be kind of like a some LED bulb will kind of like a some invention is actually happened way earlier ago. So basically is this thing, when we are allowed to people to kind of like a simply take the people innovations, like basically innovation is not kind of like a belong to the kind of like a simply only one person property. No, it kind of like a belong to the everyone property, kind of like a simply the Android open source. Okay, yeah. Then probably is this thing that innovation happened really fast. Okay, innovation happened really fast. Okay, which is really good, but there is something really wrong thing too. Okay, yeah. I'm gonna tell you wrong thing, but let's just talk about first what is actually good thing. Okay, let's just talk about what is actually good thing will gonna happen when we kind of like assembly let the innovation to the community, to the people. Okay, yeah, there is no one person is kind of like holding this thing. So basically is this thing what kind of like some advantage that it get. Let's talk about advantage first. Okay, yeah. Now I just mentioned kind of like a couple of seconds ago Android open system. Okay, yeah. So let's talk about the Android open system. So Android is operating system on your mobile phone. Basically, almost like every Android phone is a kind of like a some open source operating system. Okay. Now, basically, is this thing Android is kind of like a kind of like a provider operating system, just a operating system that how the mobile phone should supposed to be operate. Operate means what? Operate means like that when you kind of like a somebody click the Wi-Fi button, the Wi-Fi is on. What exactly it means? There is a kind of like a Wi-Fi hardware is actually exist on your phone, which enabled by the software. Okay, yeah. You kind of like a press the Bluetooth. The Bluetooth hardware is on by kind of like a do this kind of like a operating system. When you turn on the camera, camera is actually on by this kind of like operating system. So operating system operate the hardware through by the kind of like a command it kind of like a provided by the user, that is called operating system. Okay, yeah. So Android is a operating system that it can operate its hardware by the kind of like a user command. Okay, and that is called operating system. Okay, now there is a user interface, operating system user interface. Operating system user interface is a kind of like a some user interface where user could see the interface. Interface means what? A kind of like a somebody when you open your kind of like a mobile phone, you kind of like a see there is a multiple things you can slide down. You can turn on the Bluetooth, turn off the Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, torch, camera. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So basically is this thing a kind of like a normal user cannot able to kind of like a do the coding to kind of like a turn on the touch, turn on the touch or turn on the kind of like a Bluetooth and things like that. A normal person, no, he don't want to do a coding and things like that. Okay, yeah. He just wants a kind of like some interface where he just click it and things happen. Okay, yeah. This coding part will kind of like simply remove. Then the interface is actually came along. The interface is kind of like assembly where the user is kind of like assembly provide the command to the operating system, and operating system provide the command to the hardware, and it kind of like assembly started doing his thing. Okay, yeah. So that is called Android system user interface. Okay, now basically Android system user interface is a kind of like something very much flexible. Okay, let me give you perspective. Okay, yeah. What is actually Android open system? By the way, the information that I'm trying to tell you is not exactly right, it's not exactly wrong, it's just my opinion. So basically if you, okay, yeah, it's just like basically it's my opinion. Okay, I'm not really sure exactly right or not, I'm kind of like giving my opinion. So Android operating system is kind of like a provide a operating system, also interface too. but interface can change, but operating system cannot able to change. Okay, yeah. Like basically operating system is also kind of like assembly change too. Okay, it's not really that you cannot able to change. Okay, yeah. But it kind of like assembly have a blueprint regarding about how your operating system should supposed to be interface with your hardware and things like that. Okay, yeah. Now if Android or if Google wants that Android kind of like a close kind of like operating system, not open source Android system. Okay, like Apple does. Like Apple is a kind of like a close Android, close Apple is a kind of like a close operating system. Means like that only and only Apple company can kind of like somebody make phone which can have iOS. There is a no company would kind of like somebody make phone with iOS. Nothing really at all. Okay, why? Because Apple is kind of like a make sure that they kind of like assembly their innovation is kind of like utilized only on their product. That's it. They don't want to kind of like assembly utilize their operating system to the any other product. Why is that? Why they are not doing it that thing? I'm gonna explain this thing. Okay, yeah? But let's talk about the Android first. Why the Android operating system are open source Android system? What exactly open source means? Open source means like that if you want, you can kind of like a change in Android system anything that you could change. Means anything means what? Like basically if you kind of like somebody turn on the Wi-Fi, might be kind of like a camera on. Okay, yeah, it's not a glitch by the Android operating system. No, you can do that thing. You can kind of like a turn on the Wi-Fi and camera is actually on. So you can do that thing. Basically this thing you can manipulate the code, you can manipulate the everything according to your needs. Okay, yeah. So that's why there are kind of like a multiples of variations of Android system. Multiples of variation of Android system. Every phone has kind of like somebody has its own skin because Android is open based Android system. So that's why every kind of like a mobile manufacturer would kind of like a simply make the kind of like operating system or make a kind of like Android kind of like a simply work its own way. Means like that Apple operating system is kind of like look very different than kind of like a simply Realme Android system or any kind of like a simply the Motorola Android system. Okay, yeah, because it's kind of like a simply user interface. The ways that they kind of like a create the user interface, not only the user interface but as well as kind of like a inside the operating system. It kind of like called as an Android phone, but it kind of like a simply you can tweak it. Okay, yeah. So that's why Android operating system is bit more advanced, bit more kind of like a flexible, bit more customization. You can do lot of thing in Android system. You can kind of like a play video, watch music, you can kind of like a map, or you can do lot of things. Okay, because when you have this flexibility, as a kind of like other people would kind of like a make the application regarding for your Android system, and it kind of like a work very well, it work very smoothly, it work really well in regarding about everything. Okay, yeah. So that's why Android operating system is kind of like a really good, because yeah, it is buggy too. Like when it launch, it has so much bug regarding about it kind of like somebody too much slow, or it kind of like somebody phone get too much warmer and things and that. But in 2025, the Android operating system is kind of like so much more better. Because of that, it kind of like a refined by the multiple things. It kind of like a refined by kind of like a something one of the best it could be possible. Okay, yeah. So that is a kind of like some advantage of kind of like when you kind of like let your innovation to the people, so that people would kind of like make their kind of like assembly, make their kind of like assembly upgradation by on their behalf. Okay, yeah. Now regarding about this thing, regarding about that particular stuff. Okay, yeah. Why does Android choose to be open source? Why not they kind of like let their kind of like operating system for their mobile phone and that's it? Why not they do that thing? Okay, there are, first of all, there are multiple things too, because Google is not a hardware company, is a software based company. Okay, yeah. And Google wants to kind of like sell their operating system to the rest of the kind of like assembly, to the rest of the kind of like a mobile phone things and that. Okay, yeah. Because they want these are software, they are not kind of like a hardware. Like basically Apple is a company, is a hardware company. Like basically they are kind of like since the beginning they are kind of like making the product like a computer, laptop, right, iPad. These are kind of like a product that they are making. But Google is a software based company, so they are actually more meant to be selling the software, not meant to be hardware. Okay, yeah. So that's why they kind of like create a Android operating system which kind of like assembly best for the mobile phone and things like that. So that's why they didn't like kind of like make sure that they didn't like kind of like assembly is this thing that key um, uh, only for their phone. By the way, Pixel is actually launched. They are kind of like a Google phone, but it kind of like a launch very after, very after. Like basically, Pixel launch maybe in 2012 or maybe 13. Okay, probably yeah, somewhat something. Okay, get it. So that's why Google has a kind of like a Android is a kind of like open based operating system. Okay, yeah. Now let's talk about iOS. Okay, yeah. Why am I kind of like a mention only iOS and Android? Why is that exactly is this thing? Because these are kind of like a two example are kind of like a some really good example regarding about the kind of like some innovation belongs to the person or innovation belongs to the community. What is actually difference between them? Okay, yeah. So that's what kind of like I'm trying to explain you. Okay, yeah. Now I explained regarding about the Android operating system. Now let me explain regarding about iOS. What exactly is this thing? Now iOS is a closed operating system. Okay, yeah, means like it can only access through Apple. Apple is a kind of like a assembly company, and the Apple have a kind of like assembly complete right regarding about their operating system. They won't be able to sell their operating system to the any other kind of like a manufacturing phone or things like that. Now, because of this thing, in iOS you cannot do that much customization. One thing, another thing, you cannot have so many apps as compared to the kind of like assembly. In Android there are millions of apps are exist, but in iOS far lesser than that. Only kind of like a very much important kind of like apps that kind of like assembly exist in iOS. Okay, one thing. Another thing is that key iOS is kind of like a look little bit dull as compared to the Android. I'm trying to kind of like tell you from perspective. My perspective might be kind of like your perspective might be very much different, but kind of like I just feel like that ki iOS Android system is kind of like a feel like dull. Like basically there is a lock screen and there is a home screen, and there is no kind of like a widget. There is no like basically they actually kind of like introduce this some sort of widgets in iOS kind of like a newer version of things like that, but still there is no that all. Yeah, it just kind of like a feel little bit of bore. Okay, yeah. Another thing is that ki in Android you can do lot of customization regarding about what kind of like a home screen that you should supposed to be. Like basically you can put your icon anywhere you want, but in Apple you can't do that thing. Nothing really at all. Okay, yeah. As well as kind of like simply in Android, a user have kind of like complete control regarding about his mobile phone, what he can do, what he can't do, like everything. But Apple can't. You still cannot able to download the update from your mobile internet. You only and only need Wi-Fi. That's it. Okay, yeah. They are not kind of like only doing this kind of like things that no. Okay, yeah. Another thing is that the file manager, like basically is this thing. Look at the file manager. Half of the file you cannot able to see in the iPhone file manager. Like basically there is a kind of like a zip file, or there is a exe file, or there is another file. You cannot able to see them. Like access is kind of like a far more away, but you cannot able to see them. Okay, in Android phone you cannot access because the kind of like a exe file is not actually supported by the Android, but still you can see the file. You can see the file, but still iPhone is not refuse. Another thing, okay, yeah, the songs. Okay, yeah, basically in Android phone you can play the song. You can kind of like put the song from outside and you can play the song. But in iOS you can't do that thing. There is no kind of like some song. Like there, if you have a kind of like some only way to kind of like get the song by iTunes. Like basically if you have to download the iTunes and then you can download the songs. Now by the way, today is kind of like a streaming. Like basically not everyone kind of like a downloading. Everyone kind of like streaming the songs. But still I'm talking about almost like in 2015 or 2010 at that time people are kind of like downloading song, because at that time internet was not even that the thing. Okay, yeah. Another thing is that there are a lot of kind of like things. There are a lot of kind of like the limitation actually happened to the iOS. Okay, yeah. But there is also another good thing too. Regarding about safety, iOS actually providing very good amount of safety as compared to the Android. Because Android is a kind of like a iOS, so anyone can kind of like a jailbreak Android and anyone kind of like simply hack your phone and things like that. But as compared to iOS, it's not, because their operating system is not for the community. So the community doesn't really know what kind of like assembly inside their operating system, what kind of like assembly the firewall that they have. Okay, firewall is a kind of like assembly a wall that prevent the jailbreak and things like that. So basically iPhone cannot able to hack. Like it's very hard to get hacked. Okay, as compared to kind of like assembly Android. Okay. Another thing is that key iOS is kind of like assembly very seamlessly connected to its hardware. Example is this thing that key in Android phone have a 5000 milliampere battery and a 5000 milliampere battery in iOS. So probably the iPhone kind of like a last long for almost like a 1.5 day, but Android will not. Android will kind of like simply lose its charge in kind of like simply 8 or 10 or maybe kind of like simply just say 12 hour of screen on time. Okay, yeah, but in iOS maybe they have kind of like assembly, let's just say 18 to 20 hours of screen on time. Okay, yeah. So this is what kind of like assembly is this thing, because of the iOS is kind of like not meant for everybody. So iOS kind of like assembly make their kind of like assembly, because of the iOS developer kind of like make sure their operating system and their hardware or software and hardware are kind of like a interconnect with each other so much that basically just kind of like assembly connect. Okay, yeah, and they're kind of like utilizing the full potential of their hardware. Okay, yeah. So that's why their kind of like a battery efficiency is really good. That's why their camera is really good. Okay, yeah. It's not meant to be kind of like, they are not really focused on just building the bigger hardware. They're actually focusing on how do we supposed to make our software is actually connect with the hardware so much deeply that it kind of like assembly blended so well that it kind of like a perform really good. So that's why iPhone camera is kind of like a really good, but still Android camera is actually far more better in today's point of perspective, because in today's we have kind of like so many good cameras. Okay, yeah, Samsung has a really good camera, Vivo X300 has a really good camera, like far more bigger than the kind of like far more better than iOS camera. Okay, yeah. So basically it's this thing, but still this is actually happened in early, like the innovation and upgradation has actually happened in the Android in kind of like in this 5 year, like basically since 2022 now. Okay, yeah. But before that Android was bit really laggy regarding about everything, regarding about it didn't really get that much kind of like a battery efficiency, camera bit really laggy and things and that because of the it's not really connection with their hardware that much, because hardware is always changes through the company, because every company has its own hardware and they are kind of like assuming make sure that it should support the hardware connect with the operating system is not really properly functioning that well. But iOS is kind of like connecting that much, like basically iOS kind of like utilizing the full potential of their hardware. So that's why their camera is really good, their battery is really good, they're kind of like a really everything is really good. But still this situation is kind of like a true into till 2020 or 2021 probably, but then after that the Android is kind of like a way ahead of its time. Okay, yeah. So what exactly is this thing? Okay, yeah. When you have a kind of like a control innovation means like that when you have a kind of like some innovation are meant for the person who actually invent that thing, then probably when this thing actually happened, then in this particular context you actually control that innovation far more better way. Okay, and kind of like a upgrade according to you need. Obviously it not then upgrade kind of like so much rapidly, but it will gonna kind of actually upgrade according to you, according to what kind of like somebody importance for you, like it's important for you safety or security, then you're gonna make sure that your software should supposed to be secure in much more better way as compared to the open source operating system or kind of like a innovation meant for community or society. Then security will not security always compromise. Okay, yeah. So this is kind of like a some bigger problem is actually happened. Okay, yeah. Now I told you regarding about everything. Okay, I most of the time I kind of like mentioned regarding about the operating system and iOS and Android. Okay, yeah. But there is another part. Okay, there is another part that I didn't really talk about this particular thing. Okay, yeah. Let's just say, okay, yeah, let's talk about the Thomas Edison. Okay, yeah. Thomas Edison is kind of like invented the light bulb. Okay, yeah. Because of he invented the light bulb, he kind of like do the patent. Because of he do the patent, he actually earning lot of amount of money. Because of other people are not copying their product because of the patent, so he was kind of like somebody innovate. He was kind of like inspired to do innovate more. So basically, Thomas Edison invented lot of things after the light bulb. Okay, yeah. DC electric current or like basically AC is kind of like a far more better way, but DC is also much more better in some sort of context too. Okay, yeah. But cameras, like basically is this thing, the innovation of the camera is kind of like somebody is this thing that ki Thomas Edison could put kind of like a lot of upgrade into the camera too. Okay, yeah. It's not kind of like somebody I'm gonna say who is actually invented the camera, Thomas Edison. No, Thomas Edison does not really invent the camera, but kind of like improve the kind of a camera functionality in much more better way. Okay, yeah. Thomas Edison kind of like invented a lot of things. It's not really that he kind of like he just stopped making the innovation after the bulb. No, he invented a lot of things, and this actually happened because of the he was get intensified. He was get kind of like inspired, or he was kind of like getting motivated by kind of like innovating things. Okay, yeah. Because when he innovate, he gets more money. He gets more money and also royalty too. Okay, yeah. So basically, this is what kind of like somebody innovator kind of like a push them to kind of like innovate more. Okay, yeah. If the Thomas Edison is kind of like somebody doesn't really have that much patent, or patent is not even exist, then after the light bulb, the Thomas Edison will not gonna earn that much amount of money, because there are thousands of variation of light bulb was exist, and they are actually made by the thousands of people. Okay, yeah. So basically it's this thing that Thomas Edison will not gonna earn the money of the innovation that he did it. Okay, other people are kind of like earning so much amount of money. Okay, yeah. So that's why if the Thomas Edison is not actually getting the money, then how does kind of like somebody Thomas Edison will kind of like somebody motivate to innovate another thing? It's not, definitely not. Okay, yeah. So it is really essential to be a kind of like somebody give them value to the people who actually innovate this thing, because in the end the product is belong to the people who actually innovate that particular person. And when that particular thing happened, then that particular person kind of like somebody motivate to kind of like somebody innovate even another thing. Okay, yeah. Because the person who kind of like innovate one thing, person can innovate the multiple things too, and that is his credibility. Because like basically there is no kind of like a person who just invent one thing and he just stop inventing things. Okay, this is only gonna possible when the innovation is kind of like spread through community, and he will not get kind of like somebody the kind of like somebody the royalty of that particular innovation that he did. Okay, this is like basically why does I do that? Nah, if I kind of like know that if I kind of like make a really good music, okay, yeah, and next day when I public that music is kind of like belong to the community, I will not get any single amount of money. Then why would I supposed to kind of like put the effort to kind of like make the music? Because when I try to innovate that stuff, it really required my effort. Nah, it really required my effort, my money, my research and development, and everything. Okay, yeah. Like basically, and okay, why am I emphasizing money over here? Okay, why am I emphasizing money? Like basically, money is that much essential? Yeah, it is essential. I'm not saying is that money is not really essential. Money is essential too. Okay, yeah, and it is kind of like a really like basically is this thing na ki why we have money, like what exactly is this thing, what kind of like a money is actually offering? Money is actually offering value, a power, a kind of like a respect and things and that. When you have money, you can do lot of things, you can do society much more better way. So yes, money is matter. And basically is this thing, even if I'm gonna say that I am kind of like a very adhyatmic person, I don't really require money. Money is really essential. I'm not saying money is not really essential. Money is really essential. Okay, yeah. And having money is really great for innovation and things and that. So this is what something really essential. Okay, yeah. If I could understand that basically is this thing that other person kind of like steal your innovation, then why would I supposed to be kind of like do the hard work to innovate any kind of like stuff? And if I'm not innovating that stuff, then how does the another version will gonna kind of like somebody the another version will kind of like somebody upgraded it even after that? Like the innovation is not gonna happen, then how the upgrade is actually happened? Definitely not. Okay, yeah. So if the kind of like somebody if the patent and things is not even exist, then probably we will be still gonna using the kind of like somebody keypad phone right now in 2020-25. Okay, yeah. Because there is no kind of like incentive to kind of like make the kind of like things. There is a good part too. Like when you kind of like make the innovation for the public, then probably it kind of like somebody really good. Like it kind of like somebody innovate much more better way and things and that. Okay, yeah. But still is this thing that the question actually arise that who is actually innovation for? Like basically the kind of like a question is actually created regarding about the innovation. Like what is actually meaning of that? right? So this would be happen if the innovation belongs to the community. There is a good side too, there is a bad side too. Okay, it's actually depend on you, who do you want. Okay, it's actually depend on that key. Do you want your innovation for a kind of like somebody is this thing or that or that? Okay, I'm gonna ask one last question. I know it's kind of like it's a bit late. Okay, yeah, but let's talk. You actually invented this artifact. Okay, yeah. Would you make this artifact? Would you make this kind of like an invention for the people, for the community? Like basically, is this thing like kind of like somebody, the other people kind of like somebody do this thing? No, I don't want to. Now, why? Why is that thing? Like, why are you not kind of like let your innovation for the open source? Well, let me give you context. Okay, it's not a kind of like a operating system. It's not a kind of like a Android operating system that kind of like a I could sell and things and that and that. No, the innovation that I make is an artifact. Now, artifact is a kind of like a somewhat something kind of like a really much different way. Okay, yes, I need money too. I need royalty too, and it's not really that key. Just like that, I didn't really want. I want that money is kind of like a matter. That is true. But one of the another thing is that na key when I innovate this particular artifact, and if I kind of like let the people to kind of like simply do the things by yourself, like basically just think that key, I kind of like let's just say I kind of like make the application regarding about artifact. I already mentioned regarding about what exactly my artifact is about. Okay, yeah. If I kind of like simply I didn't have patent, so basically what exactly happened that other companies or other people would kind of like establish the same app exactly like me. Okay, same app exactly like me. Now, and they are kind of like delivering their services in their region, which is good. Okay, which is really good too. Okay, but the problem is actually arise in one thing. Okay, what is exactly that? Because of I'm kind of like a recording artifact for almost like a decade, so I do have experience regarding about what is actually its consequences. Okay, like basically what is actually is this thing? Now, it's not just a kind of like a simply recording. There is a lot of things. Like basically is this thing when you record the artifact, if the other person is kind of like listening your artifact, that other person is kind of like influenced by the what is actually that fuck you say. Okay, whatever the things that you're gonna say. Okay, so it is really essential for you to whatever the kind of like somebody, whatever the person or whatever the user will gonna say should supposed to be kind of like a somebody should supposed to be kind of like somebody judge or should supposed to be kind of like a say that key, like basically what I'm trying to tell you is this thing, the artifact is a kind of like a something, this kind of like some innovation where kind of like a somebody people gonna utilize for very very wrong purposes. Example is this thing, if there is a kind of like a, let's just say Chinese person is a kind of like a, always have make the copy regarding about every product that they are making. Like they have copy version of kind of like Instagram, Facebook, Google, Rolls Royce, Mercedes. They know what they can copy. They can copy everything. Okay, yeah. I don't know, but this kind of like a global perspective regarding about the Chinese people. Okay, yeah. And definitely because of the Chinese market is a very close market, so probably they would also have a replica regarding about my artifact too. Okay, yeah. Now, what exactly is this thing? What is exactly that? Okay, yeah. So example, let's just take an example. Okay, example is this thing that key in my application, in my artifact, I would have complete control regarding about all the safety things. Make sure that the privacy, make sure that the every person shouldn't supposed to know anyone at also. Another thing is that my artifact, you cannot able to share your artifact to the anyone as also. You cannot able to listen your artifact in speaker. Okay, also have this upgrade. You can only and only kind of like listen this artifact only in headphone or earphone. You cannot able to speak in kind of like artifact because it's a thought process, and I'm gonna make sure that it shouldn't supposed to be kind of like for the public and things like that. I'm gonna make sure that artifact are meant to be public, meant to be kind of like meant to be kind of like a personal, but it also kind of like a public too. But kind of like a make sure that privacy should supposed to be maintained. Privacy should supposed to be maintained. That every person should supposed to be record their artifact, their identity. Is my responsibility to kind of like a make sure I should supposed to be keep it that thing. Okay, yeah. Now, if the Chinese version launched the kind of like a replica of my artifact, they would kind of like do anything that they want. They would kind of like they say that key, okay, like basically is this thing that key, if you kind of like a think that your kind of like identity will kind of like a public if you want. Okay, yeah. Like basically user have a choice. Okay, yeah. If the user have a choice, then user kind of like make their profile as a public. Okay, yeah. Now if the user has a make their profile as a public, then their personal life kind of like invent. Because when the people record the artifact, they actually record their personal life. And obviously, if it's public, then probably everyone knows what is actually been through, what is actually happened with you and things like that. and other people will kind of like take advantage of you, or you will not feel really good regarding about that. Example is this thing: you wrote the diary and that diary went public to the college and things like that. Do you like that particular stuff? Don't like that thing. Okay, ठीक है, like basically this is kind of like a stuff that okay, you kind of like make sure that your kind of like a privacy should supposed to be maintained. But regarding about sexual thoughts and things like that, let's just say okay, we are human, we are drive towards the sexual thoughts, we are drive towards kind of like a things. Let's just say there is a person who is kind of like let me tell you my perspective, what exactly I've been through. Okay, so basically this thing, if there is a person who is kind of like a recording thoughts regarding about the sex, okay, he kind of like record the thoughts regarding about he first time he had a sex, and he kind of like mentioned the story regarding about how he does sex and things like that. Now that particular person kind of like share that artifact to my platform. Now what exactly is this thing? Okay, if that particular person have a kind of like a genuine interaction with this thing and he wanted to kind of like share that thoughts, okay, I let him share, but he was kind of like doing this thing again and again and again and again. Why is that? Like basically why that particular person doing this again and again? Because of that people will listen, because people are always drive towards sexual thoughts. Okay, yeah, so if the person who's actually talking about the sexual stuff, people will definitely gonna listen. Okay, what exactly been through, what exactly happened, how do you kind of like put your penis inside your vagina and things like that. He will definitely gonna kind of like try to listen, that other people might gonna listen. And when the other people will gonna listen, that people will kind of like somebody, that particular artifact get kind of like somebody recommend to the more and more, because so many people are watching, so many people are listening. So basically they are kind of like providing the likes or kind of like somebody, let's just say things and that. So we need to kind of like recommend to the more and more people. So basically what is actually happened in my artifact, basically my platform is kind of like abundant by kind of like a lot of sexual things and that. Then my platform is bitterly corrupted. Okay, yeah. It's not that we don't have sexual thoughts. We have sexual thoughts too, but we also have another thoughts too. Okay, yeah. Basically this thing, yes, I allowed you to do kind of like a sex, I allow you to kind of like share your sexual thoughts and things like that, but I will not allow you to do every single day. I would not allow you to do things and that. Okay, yeah, there is a kind of like a judgmental system in my kind of like artifact that kind of like judge your artifact regarding about how it should supposed to be and how it affect to the community. Because let me tell you one thing is this thing, that if you are the person who's kind of like listening to sexual thoughts regarding about someone actually talking about he was kind of like doing a sex with the multiples of people and things like that, the people who kind of like listen that artifact, that particular person is kind of like influenced to do the thing, kind of like a sex with another person. Now if he get consent to do the sex, that is okay, but if he not get consent to do the sex, then what that particular person do? That particular person will gonna rape that another women or things like that. Who is actually responsible for that? My platform will be responsible for that, because my platform is allow that particular person to kind of like let this particular person do sexual thoughts and other person actually influenced by this thing and that. My platform is actually responsible for that thing. That is really fucked up, dude. Really fucked up. I understand the gravity regarding about our artifact. I understand what it kind of like influence to the people. So it is really essential for me to judge the artifact in much more better way, so that I would kind of like make sure that artifact to the resonate to the society in much more better way. Let me tell you one thing. Yeah, we are kind of like influenced by the people. Okay, yeah, but also then why we are kind of like letting this thing, like basically this thing that if the people are actually influenced by the sexual thoughts and things like that, then why am I kind of like making this application, things like that? Okay, yeah, we are also influenced by the sexual thought, that is okay, but we are also influenced by the people other thoughts too. Okay, let's just say there is a person who is actually talking about the economy. There is a person who is actually talking about the kind of like how he went through the relationship. There is a person who is actually talking about the kind of like how the country should supposed to work really good and things like that. He was kind of like sharing thoughts and things like that. Now the person who's kind of like sharing thoughts and that short thought went publicly, other people are get influenced and they also kind of like try to do the things much more better way. Let's just say, how do you supposed to make your economy much more better way? That particular person has an idea and he would kind of like implement that idea in real world to make the economy much more better, which kind of like add value to the society. Right? Yeah. So I wanted to share the thoughts with kind of like a respected, with kind of like somebody add the value to the society. I want that. Okay, yeah. Now basically is this thing, if the Chinese company who kind of like have a replica regarding about my artifact, and they would kind of like somebody do the thing, they would not consider regarding about that. They would kind of like looking at the profit number. Because let me tell you one thing, when the profit will actually happen, when the more and more people are actually stick at your profile, stick at your platform for more and more amount of time, so that you kind of like simply show the advertisement, so that you kind of like earn the money. So basically is this saying the Chinese people who kind of like have a replica regarding about my artifact, they only and only focus regarding about profit. They are not focusing regarding about what exactly happened with the people, what exactly happened with kind of like assembly when they release the artifact and things like that. So basically when this thing happened, people will might gonna share regarding about sexual thoughts, people might gonna talk about the religious hate, people will gonna talk about the kind of like assembly lot of not good stuff. And let me tell you one thing, we are humans and we are drive from fear. Okay, we always get attention towards fear. Like basically there is a joy, there is a fear. We are kind of like assembly is this thing, we are choose to be fear to kind of like give the attention, because fear is a kind of like a thing that we are evolved with it. Okay, we are evolved with it. When there is a scared thing regarding about that, when wrong thing happen or things happen, indirectly our mind, our attention towards the fear. Okay, and this is what kind of like our mind is actually work and things like that. Okay, yeah. Now basically is this thing, when this thing happened, the Chinese people who actually have a replica regarding about my application, they are actually selling that fear. And that fear means what? Sexual thoughts, hate speeches, religious context, or God not what they're anything. Okay, yeah. And when this thing happened, it kind of like a replicate on their community, the people who kind of like listen their artifact, they kind of like a replicate, and it kind of like a happen in their community. They actually happen with the kind of like a really wrong thing. And it kind of like a really wrong thing. Because the people who actually have a replica regarding an artifact, they are only focused on profit. They are not focusing on kind of like a how does kind of like a make the human much more better way through the artifact. Okay, yeah. Because they haven't really experienced this thing, because they haven't really recorded the artifact. Because I record the artifact for almost like a decade, so I do have experience regarding about this thing. So that's why I will not kind of like simply make sure my innovation for people, because people might gonna use for wrong purposes. And if you still not really understand this thing, okay, I'm gonna ask very honest question. You have to give the answer. Don't give me answer. Give the answer to yourself. Okay, yeah. When you first time open the internet, what kind of like a site that you access? Like I'm not saying that you open the kind of like a first time you kind of like open the Google and kind of like Gmail and things like that. Okay, yeah. What exactly that you wanted to access? Obviously porn, because I also do that thing. Because at that when I realized that the internet is a kind of like a thing that you can access the porn, I went there and I access. Even if I don't know how do I supposed to access the internet, I still went to the internet cafe. And I did that thing. I accessed that porn website. Okay, yeah. Because of what? Because of the every innovation is actually happened, people are actually utilized for wrong purposes, and that is true. Like right now we are actually utilizing internet for very right purposes. Okay, we are actually kind of like doing a lot of things on the internet, which is a really good thing. But at the beginning, people actually utilize for porn. People actually utilize for kind of like somebody download kind of like somebody download movies and things like that. But by the way, I also download the movies from the torrent. It's not really bad things too, but still, okay, it is that. People are definitely kind of like utilize the innovation for wrong purposes at the early stage of the innovation happened, and which is true. So that's why if I kind of like invent artifact, if I kind of like have this application, I will not allow my application to the people, to the kind of like community and things like that. I want my application to my full control, so that I would kind of like make sure that a kind of like a responsible way to kind of like utilize the artifact for better community, for better purposes, for better things. I want that. Okay, if I kind of like lose little bit of profit, that is okay. Because I also understand what kind of like the responsibility that I will hold. Okay, if there is millions of people will gonna record the artifact and billions of people actually listening that artifact, then billions of people actually influenced by the innovation. Dude, I'm talking about billions of people. There are 8 billion people actually exist on this planet. So do you understand how much it impact? So that is it. Okay, yeah. By the way, it's been almost like 49 minutes. All right. This is it. I have to end here, and thank you.